Today we're going to be taking a look at how the RG503 handles retro game emulation. Now I'm playing the RG503 completely stock, with the only change being that I've put frames on so then the game's actually playing the proper aspect ratio as opposed to being stretched across the screen. And I really do like the frames that come with the RG503 as part of their Linux OS build. Kicking off with the N64, and we can see the RG503 is struggling with Banjo-Kazooie. Especially during the cutscenes, we can see that the frame rate is choppy and the audio quality as well is really stuttering. As you get into the gameplay itself, it is smoother, but there's still certain points where the game is clearly struggling on the RG503. Moving on, in Castlevania Legacy of Darkness does play a bit better than Banjo-Kazooie, but we can still see that it's struggling on the hardware. This is such a shame, especially coming off the back of the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus, which was dealing with these games quite easily. I really hoped the RG503 emulation was going to be closer to the 552 than the 351, but it looks like it's not. Moving on to the Nintendo DS, and I was really surprised to see that the RG503 was struggling with this as well. Playing Cars Made to National, we can hear the audio is really choppy, and even the gameplay itself is really struggling. I thought this might have been because we had both screens on at the same time, but even when you go into single screen mode, you can still see it struggling. Trying another racing game, and Need for Speed Underground 2 is pretty similar as well. Racing through, you can see that the RG503 is struggling to comfortably play these Nintendo DS games. Trying something different, and Lego Star Wars was much more comfortable. This was a much smoother experience. It still wasn't perfect, but it was struggling nowhere near as much as it was with Cars Made International and Need for Speed Underground 2. I guess that Nintendo DS emulation is more difficult than I thought it was going to be. Next up, we've got the Dreamcast, and Crazy Taxi 2 again was struggling on the RG503 more than I thought it would. The issues here seem to be choppy audio and again some stuttering during gameplay. Now, it's not impossible to play these games. I think you could comfortably play through these, especially if you're a forgiving gamer, but it's quite noticeably distant from that perfect emulation that I think we should be expecting in retro emulation handhelds these days, especially for Dreamcast games. Moving on to Sonic Adventure 2, and the RG552 and the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus both handled this without any problems, but we can see again the RG503 is struggling a bit, which gives us more indication that the processor in this is more towards the power of the RG351 than the RG552. Moving on to the PlayStation 1, and I absolutely love the frame that comes with this, and even more so, I love the emulation as well. This is much smoother, and we can see PlayStation 1 games run really nicely on the RG503. Ridge Racer 4 was running along nicely with absolutely no issues from the audio side or from the graphical side. Following on, and Crash Bandicoot 2 was also equally as smooth as well. The RG503 definitely struggled with N64 emulation and a bit with Dreamcast as well, but it's nice to see that it's got the PlayStation 1 emulation sorted. Next up, we're looking at the PSP, and Tekken 6 really struggled on the RG503. Instantly you can hear that the audio is choppy and the graphics are really slow as well. The console is struggling with this, and for a fighting game that makes it quite difficult to enjoy. Tekken 6 is quite a graphically intense game for the PSP, but still I would have hoped the RG503 could have dealt with it a bit better. Moving on, and Vice City Stories is much better. There are a few issues, a couple of slowdown moments here, and the audio does stutter ever so often, but it's not as frequent as we've seen in some of the other games. Overall, I would say I was definitely hoping the RG503 was gonna be a bit more powerful when it came to emulation. It does very much feel like this is a 351 version 2 as opposed to the next step in emulation that we're hoping for. If you want to see the full review of the RG503, then make sure you subscribe because the episode comes out in a couple of days.